as a new mom yourself right now, what are some challenges you've been experiencing for your own sleep and your baby's sleep?
Yes, great question. So there are some big categories, I would say. One is often overlooked is a huge circadian disruption of the mom's sleep, and other parents too, dads, partners, everybody, whether you're an adopted parent, birthing parent, any sort of parent dealing with a newborn, you're going to have circadian disruption. And what I mean is, normally, hopefully, if you have healthy sleep and circadian systems, what's going on is that you are awake during the day and you're asleep at night. And this pattern is very clear and very consistent. So you get sleepy around the same time each evening, you sleep pretty solidly through the night, and then you're pretty awake. You wake up at about the same time every day and you're pretty awake during the day. That's how it should work. But what happens when you have a baby is that the baby does not have a circadian rhythm when they're born. So they are basically taking naps all throughout the day and night. To them, day and night are exactly the same. So then, because you have to care for the newborn, for the baby, you also then end up following your baby's patterns and you get scattered too. You end up sleeping in broken up chunks. And so that's one of the biggest problems is circadian disruption. The timing consistency of when you sleep and when you're awake gets really messed up. Now, along with that comes problem number two, which is usually people are not getting enough sleep, because even though your baby is sleeping like 16, 18 hours a day, your circadian rhythm still exists to the extent that you are awake during the day. And besides, you have to do stuff. You have to cook, and some parents have to work immediately afterwards, which is a whole other issue. You have to take care of other kids, you have to do personal hygiene, lots of things you need to do during the day, so you can't sleep most of the time during the day, and you have to be up for long chunks during the night, so then you end up sleeping less in total, and your sleep is interrupted during the night. So that's problem number two. And problem number three is that, especially if you're a brand new parent, this is your first time having a baby, you are probably pretty stressed out and you are always wondering, am I doing this right? What am I doing? When is the baby going to sleep more or get less colicky? You're just dealing with so much uncertainty and unknowns that the stress on your system causes this 24/7 hyperarousal, not to mention the hormonal things that are happening to make you hyper vigilant. If you're the birthing parent, you have hormones that are making you hyper vigilant to sounds. Like right now, I could lay down and try to sleep, and the chicken in my backyard will make a noise, and I'll be like, "Oh, is that the baby?" So your system is just geared to be more hyper aroused, and that hyper arousal can make sleep more difficult. So that some parents are saying, "Okay, now my baby's sleeping pretty well, but I'm still not sleeping." Or like, I finally put my baby back to sleep after a midnight feeding, and somehow I'm still laying here looking at the ceiling. And it's very frustrating, right? Because in another 2 hours you're gonna have to get up again. And meanwhile, you're not being able to sleep in the meantime. And that's super frustrating. So I would say these are the three main issues: circadian disruption, curtailed sleep or just not enough sleep, and third, just more hyperarousal, more stress.
Wow, that sounds really challenging.
It really is.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I can definitely see pros and cons of a lot of different things, right? Being a new parent, you are hyper vigilant. You want that way you can really pay attention to the new
Mhm,
baby to make sure
mhm,
they are safe, their needs are met, but at the same time, that's a stress on yourself. Plus
mhm.
all these other daily responsibilities you already have. Wow.
Yeah, it's really tough. And especially now that I'm back to work, the
Oh.
day goes on. I have to, take care of my patients, and I have to like write and document and do all these things. And my sleep is disrupted. So modern parenting, I think, is especially hard because we don't have, in America at least, where we don't have very good maternity leave and paternity leave policies. we really have to function on very disrupted circadian rhythms and disrupted sleep. And that's so tough for parents.
Right. Because I'm curious how long the maternity leave would be a reasonable length, right?
Mhm.
That come back to the point you mentioned earlier. Baby's sleep is different. Baby
Mhm.
does not have circadian rhythm. So can you help the audience understand a little bit more how
Mhm.
baby's sleep develop? To what point they're gonna start having some kind of circadian rhythm?
Yeah. So, well, here's the good news. It's not that long. Starting at about 6-ish weeks, and certainly by 3 months, they do have a circadian rhythm. That doesn't mean they're necessarily sleeping through the night at that point, but by that point, they should have a very distinct day versus night pattern. They should be sleeping most of the time at night and getting most of their sleep at night. And at least awake a lot more during the day. They're still going to be taking a lot of naps, but if you were tracking their sleep and like coloring in the hours where they're sleeping, you should see a distinct day versus night pattern. So, and to this point, I think we mentioned this last time when we were talking about pregnancy sleep. During pregnancy, if you are the parent carrying the child and birthing the child, you can actually help your baby develop a circadian rhythm faster by having very good circadian behaviors yourself during pregnancy. So, for example, if you keep a pretty consistent sleep and wake pattern yourself during pregnancy, get plenty of light during the day and plenty of darkness during the night, that's helping your brain circadian system itself, and you're helping your babies, the fetuses, master circadian clock in their brain to develop and to mature better. So parents who are able to do that better during pregnancy have babies that develop circadian rhythms sooner, in their life. So I'll give you an example with my own kids. With my first child, when I was pregnant, I was a brand new parent. I didn't really know what I was doing. I had no other kids to sort of keep me on track. So when I was pregnant, I was just like, oh, I'll nap whenever, I'll sleep in on weekends, I'll do whatever. I was like pretty good, but not, I didn't really pay attention to circadian rhythms. And my baby developed a circadian rhythm at about 2 months, 3 months ish. And the first 3 months were so tough. With my second baby, this time I was very careful about making sure I had a strong circadian rhythm during my pregnancy. Plus, my toddler was forcing me to do that anyways because he has, his schedule. So in a way, he helped me and helped his baby sister. Because with my second child, by 4 weeks, she was like pretty much sleeping mostly through the night, like only getting up about twice during the night, very solid during the night, like a lot more awake during the day, very clear and consistent bedtimes and wake times. So, I don't know for sure if there was a causality there, but I wouldn't be surprised if my better circadian rhythms during pregnancy contributed to her developing a robust circadian system much earlier than her brother did.
Wow. That's so interesting and sounds like so important, right? We always talk about baby sleep train, but the training actually really starts when they're still uh, in
Inside.
belly.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, I think that's one of the big misconceptions about sleep training. I think this term can be a fraught term. It can bring up a lot of connotations, and there's a lot of controversy around it. So often when we hear the term sleep training, we think of, okay, cry it out. We're just going to put a baby in the crib, like leave the room and come back 12 hours later, which I just like talking about it. Like it's really hard for a parent to even think about doing that.
Yeah.
We can talk more about cry it out later. But right now, the point I want to make is that there's actually a lot of lead up to that point. Whether or not you end up doing cry it out with your baby, there's so much that you can do to help your baby to sleep and help yourself to sleep much earlier than that point where you're trying to decide whether to cry it out or not. From even during pregnancy and from day one when the baby is born, you can be helping yourself and your baby to develop that circadian rhythm and to consolidate nighttime sleep.
Yeah, definitely. We can touch on that later. So now we know, right? As parents, as new parents, we possibly have to set our expectations right
Mm-hmm,
to understand baby sleep are different than
mm-hmm.
adult sleep. So we should not expect them to sleep in a certain way when
Yes.
they're born. So now we understand that, we get used to that, we observe maybe after several weeks to months. Eventually, we start noticing, oh, some patterns being
Mm-hmm,
formed. So in this journey or at that point, what are some things you have done to really help yourself
mm-hmm.
to sleep better?
Yes. So again, I'm going to focus on the circadian piece because I think this is one that is largely missing from the public health advice that moms hear. We hear a lot about nighttime sleep and, prioritizing sleep and nap when the baby naps. And yes, that kind of sometimes works, but I mean, sometimes you can't nap when the baby naps. It's like, okay, great. Nap when the baby naps and file taxes while the baby files taxes, like do the dishes while the baby does dishes. I can't do that. So sometimes it's actually a little bit of a pet peeve of mine to hear, nap when the baby naps, prioritize sleep. It's like, yeah, I'm trying to prioritize sleep. I want to sleep, trust me. So, okay, here's something else I can offer that hopefully is more doable. The circadian piece is very important. So again, just a quick brief primer on circadian rhythms. Our brains have a clock, many clocks actually, and one master clock that really likes to know the difference between day versus night and to have a really consistent expectation of when day starts and when night begins, right? So the biggest cue that we can get to help our brain know when is day, when is night, is light. And the light that enters our eyes is actually detected by cells, photosensitive cells in the backs of our retinae that send the signals directly to the brain that says, okay, it's daytime versus there's not a lot of light, it's nighttime. So we need to get lots of light during the day and not a lot of light at night to help our circadian rhythms be robust. Now, I'll share a really interesting research finding, which I just found mind blowing.
Oh,
For new parents, they spend about 80% or even more of their day in a dim room
oh.
or in an environment that's very, very dim, less than 500 lux. Well, actually, sorry, let me check my notes to make sure I'm getting the numbers right because
Mhm.
this is such an important finding. So, sorry, you may have to edit this part out.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry for the interruption. Um, okay. Okay, let's see. All right, I have the numbers pulled up here. So yes, we spend about 70 to 80% of the day in a really dim room, less than 50 lux. So the 500 lux I was thinking earlier was even too generous. 50 lux is like a few candles, or like a room with like the shutters drawn, quite dark.
Mhm.
And we spend less than 5% of our day in the amount of light that would be equivalent to an overcast day. So not even full sunny, broad daylight, but an overcast day, less than 5%. So
Wow.
it's basically like you deliver your baby or you adopt your baby, you have your baby, and then suddenly you're shoved into a dark cave and that's where you live 24/7. Now, of course, your circadian rhythms are going to suffer when that happens. You have much so many fewer cues for your brain to know when it's day versus night. It's like a big shift in how your brain experiences light versus dark. So that's why I have some more figures here. Um, our melatonin curve. So melatonin is the hormone that um, sort of helps to tell the rest of your body when it's day versus night. Now that curve should be very clear in showing, it should be very low during the day, melatonin should be high at night.
Mhm.
What happens to that curve during the postpartum period is it flattens.
Mm.
So it gets to be higher during the day and less at night because you are experiencing more darkness during the day and more light at night when you're turning on the lights to feed your baby at night. So that curve flattens. And of course, that's going to affect the quality and quantity of your sleep. So I know I've like rambled on a lot about circadian rhythms. The take home message is get a lot more light during the night, during the day. So take your baby outside, take yourself outside, open the curtains, sit by a bright window if you're going to be sitting there feeding your baby or doing something else, and turn off the lights at night. Put away screens or dim those screens. Use a light night to feed your baby at night. Don't turn on the overhead, light. Like I was just showing you before we started recording, I had dark red pillowcases piled over my lamp even to keep it as dark as possible. So that's one of the best things you can do for your sleep and your baby's sleep, is to make that contrast really big between day and night.
Right, right. So kind of like maintain, as adults, we want to maintain our normal healthy circadian rhythm. And at the same time, while we're doing that, we're actually help the child, I'm sure, to develop, right, their own circadian rhythm. And light always so important. But I'm also shocked why so many new parents stay so long in a dimmed room. Is that their behavior changed because they have a baby?
Yes, I know it's shocking how a full day can go by
Uh-huh.
and suddenly you realize, oh my gosh, I've been indoors all day. And I didn't understand this research finding before I had kids. Now I so so totally understand it, because one, a newborn is just needing to feed around the clock. They are feeding every 1 to 3 hours. And at first, it takes a long time to feed, especially if you're breastfeeding. It
Uh,
can take 45 minutes to an hour to do one feeding session because they're not very efficient with their feeding yet. So that means you're sitting there like stuck in a chair or in bed or wherever you're feeding, um, feeding this baby. And you're not going outside as much, because as soon as you finish feeding your baby, you got to change them and they need to sleep again, because they're napping so often. Their wake window is like 45 minutes to an hour long. So you have barely enough time to change them and feed them before you're putting them down for a nap. And to put them down for a nap, in the first couple weeks, they can go down by themselves pretty easy. But especially if you have a colicky baby or a fussy baby during those first 12 weeks, very common to have a fussy baby. Um, you have to soothe them to sleep. You have to work really hard to rock them, walk around, bounce on a bouncy ball, so you're working very hard to put them to sleep. And if you're trying to help them to sleep, you're probably in a dark room together, because
oh.
if it's like super bright, they're not going to sleep either. So, there's a lot of reasons, there's a lot of opportunity for a parent to be in a dark room and not a lot of opportunity to be in a bright space or to be outside. Because even when you do have an opportunity, you're so tired that you're like, let me try to catch a nap, or let me just lie down here, instead of let me go outside, right? So
Oh.
that's why we're kind of set up to fail almost with how much darkness there is. So that's why we have to work extra hard to remind ourselves to be at least sitting by a bright window, and maybe sitting on the porch to rest or to feed your baby when you can, so you're getting at least some light.
Right. Hope once our audience, whoever listening, right, know the knowledge, know the research, they will choose, make options, what's gonna be helpful
Hmm.
to their situation. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's like unknown, and then we just tend to do whatever the day asks us to do.
Yes, that's so true. That's a very good point, that, we can have the knowledge and we can try our best. Sometimes it's just not possible. Newborns are, especially if you have a colicky newborn, especially if you have another child or another children already, you're just so pulled in so many directions. It's not necessarily easy or even at all possible to do, quote, best practices. So definitely I would advise people to give themselves a lot of forgiveness and grace and a lot of acceptance that you can try your best, and sometimes it's not possible to do what you, quote, should do.
Right. But at least sounds like this light change is a little bit more under our control, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the baby's development, whether baby have circadian rhythm, when they're gonna do that, we cannot fully control it. We can go with it, observe, try our best. But the light, at least that's something more doable.
It is more doable, yes. And if you live in a house or apartment that's just like kind of dim and you don't have a lot of natural light, or you don't have a lot of opportunity to go outside because you work indoors, that another suggestion I have is either a light box or light glasses. These can be a little bit pricey, but you can probably find some bargains, on Amazon or something for the light box, where you can give yourself a little extra boost if you can't go outside. I mean, going outside is the best because then at least you're also moving your body and getting some fresh air. But if you can't do that, light goggles, light box can give you the extra boost. So 20 minutes in the morning can go a long way.
Great. So there are a lot of strategies we can consider to
Mhm.
boost our light situation.
Yes, absolutely. And it really goes a long way.
Yeah, great. Then any other strategies you think is important for parents, for new parents to know, either about themselves or for the babies?
Mhm. So I would say another tricky one is napping.
Mm.
Often we hear nap when the baby naps, and this is sort of true. So there's pros and cons to this. In the very beginning, when you're in the first couple of weeks, especially if you are the birth giving parent, absolutely nap when the baby naps. Just nap almost whenever, as much as you can, because your body is in such a state of um, needing recovery because it's just gone through some major trauma, especially if you had a difficult birth or if you had a C-section or other complications. You really need to just get as much sleep as you can get whenever, however. But as you're entering like the third and fourth week, and especially if you're physically recovering pretty well, you should be getting yourself back to mostly sleeping at night and napping not very much during the day. This again is to help your circadian rhythm. And also, when you nap during the day, it's like eating a snack before dinner. You are taking away some of that homeostatic sleep drive that you need in order to sleep well at night. Now, by all means, I am not saying to not nap. I am a huge fan of napping, especially for new parents. I myself took full advantage of napping post baby. Um, but we need to nap strategically, by which I mean nap at about the same time every day and have that be early-ish during the day, like midday, early afternoon, and keep the nap to a reasonable like hour at most, maybe like hour and a half at most. What we don't want is haphazard napping, like napping some days not, some days in the morning, some days in the evening, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for 3 hours, just kind of like here and there grab bag of napping. That is no good because what that's going to do is confuse your circadian clock, um, take away from your nighttime sleep, especially if you're napping in the evenings. That's really going to take away from your nighttime sleep. And it's really going to mess up the timing and amount of your nighttime sleep. That turns into a vicious cycle because then some days you're going to sleep in a lot, or some days nights you're going to sleep very little. And that carries into the next day and how sleepy you are, or how ready you like how much sleep drive you have for the next night. So as you know, even with people who are not pregnant or not post baby, when we do regular CBTI with folks with insomnia, we really want that steady, consistent sleep pattern, right? Because when we don't have that consistent pattern, it feeds into a vicious cycle of insomnia. So that's why napping strategically is very important.
So consistency is a key.
Yes, consistency and not napping too long. I would cap it at about an hour, hour and a half at most.
Mm. And for the nap, would you suggest spread it out throughout the day, like multiple short naps, or it's okay to have a longer nap just once a day?
I would say ideally you actually want to have one consolidated nap once a day, but that might not be possible in the early weeks. Like the first 2 to 4 weeks, you might be doing like two shorter naps. But even then, even your second nap, try to keep it on the earlier end, like not too late into the afternoon and certainly not in the evening. Um, Although I would say, caveat to that, at any time, if you feel like you're so sleepy that you're not able to be safe, certainly take a short nap to take the edge off. Safety first. So if you feel like you're dozing off as you're holding your baby and you're going to drop your baby, absolutely take a nap. Or if you need to drive somewhere, absolutely take a nap if you're going to be drowsy. Um, but as we're getting into like the fourth week and beyond, sixth week, as beyond, as your baby is starting to develop that circadian rhythm, work on doing your best to consolidate your napping and making your napping consistent.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that's very important reminder for a lot of parents. And also, I would imagine this, even though we see consistency, right? But the schedule possibly going to change after several
Mhm.
weeks as the baby's sleep change.
Exactly. Yes. So a lot of what drives your sleep in the early months is going to be your baby sleep. As we get into like the baby being, 6 months old, maybe even a little bit earlier, as they're getting um, better and better about sleeping longer stretches at night and their circadian rhythm is like more fully set, their nap schedules are settling into a consistent pattern. At that point, it's not really the baby sleep that's driving your sleep anymore. At that point, if the parent is still having significant sleep problems, there are other things going on. I know for a lot of parents, it feels like as soon as their baby sleeps through the night or sleeps better, their sleep will be better, or that's what they're hoping. Um, but as we're getting into the 6 months range, it's usually at least a big part of it is other stuff that's getting in the way.
I see. Okay. So now as baby grows, right?
Mhm.
I want to ask about the baby sleep more.
Mhm.
Because two big things I want to ask you since we are both psychologists.
Yeah.
And what I hear most concern from parents is whether sleep training for babies gonna harm babies' emotional development, their
Mhm.
attachment, their security.
Mhm.
So, and overall, obviously, their mental health, basically. Another thing is, I notice a lot of Chinese parents who
Mhm.
come to me for different issues, they all kind of like co-sleep with
Yeah.
not only the baby, but even the older child. And for the baby,
Mm.
maybe they all sleep on the same bed. But for when the child gets a little older, like 4 years old, 5 years old, the parents always have to sleep with the baby, fall asleep together, and
Mhm.
then
Mhm.
leave the room, right? So I have some clients complain to me they cannot really have their time, intimate time with their partner because if
Yeah.
they have two children,
Yeah.
one gonna sleep with each child, and
Oh, oh
they
my gosh.
themselves just fall asleep with the baby, right?
Yeah.
And then when they
Yeah.
wake up, they go back to the bedroom and do their own sleeping. I was like,
Yeah.
that sounds very, I'm not sure. I have a lot of
That's
opinions
tough.
about that.
Yeah. Oh, it's tough. I'd be curious to hear your opinions too, because I really love that you pinpointed this is a cultural thing because I also have noticed that people from certain cultures and backgrounds are much more likely to co-sleep than other cultures, and it's actually a hot debate amongst even sleep experts about, well, is there a universally right way to do it? Is co-sleeping good or bad? Or so both of the questions you asked are very good questions because they are controversial. Let's start with the easier one, which is cry it out and sleep training. So, like I mentioned earlier, sleep training is a whole set of things that you can do to help your baby sleep. Cry it out is one optional piece of it. So, there are plenty of babies who do the other aspects of sleep training and then end up sleeping pretty well and end up sleeping on their own, and or they get to a point that feels good to everybody in the family and they don't need to do cry it out and it's fine. And then for some kids, like they really cannot get to a point where they're sleeping independently when the parents really want them to sleep independently. And crying it out is really the last step that they really need to do to fully get there. So I just want to clarify that it's not like you do nothing to help your baby sleep and then boom, you do cry it out. There's a lot of lead up to it. Like, the light that we talked about, the consistency and the lots of things that we don't have time to get into. But when it comes to cry it out, the main concern, as you said, is about, is this traumatic for the baby? Is this going to harm attachment or emotional development? And the short answer is no. We have plenty of research showing that when you do sleep training, including extinction-based methods like cry it out, um, there is no lasting damage. It does not harm your attachment with your baby and your baby's, growth and their psychological growth, their emotional functioning, none of that. And, to offer people a little bit of a personal take on it, my toddler is now 2 years old, and we did cry it out with him at 5 months old, 5.5 months. And he does not have any problems with attachment, emotional development. He's a perfectly normal toddler in those senses. And so, often I find that parents are reassured by me also being a parent, having done it myself. And it's not just that I'm saying from a research standpoint, it's okay. Like I also have done it with my own kid, and I plan to do it with my second baby too. Now, often people will cite a couple of studies that point to the concern. One is a study of Romanian orphans at an orphanage where they ended up having attachment problems when they were allowed to cry it out to sleep. But what's also happening in that setting is that they're also not getting a lot of attention outside of sleep, like during the day. They don't have the other necessities, the real necessities of forming good attachment with their caregiver, like having one stable caregiver that gives them lots of attention, one stable environment, and all of the other things that a baby needs, right? So with that study, we really can't pinpoint it to cry it out for sleep as the main culprit for the problems. The other study people cite is a study where they measured cortisol levels. So this is a stress hormone in babies and in parents during the cry it out phase. So they did the study for 3 overnights, and they found that at first, the baby and the parents' cortisol levels matched. So when parents, the mom's cortisol level is high, the baby's is high. When it's low, the baby's is low. And so it seems that they are in sync in that way. And then during cry it out, they saw that the mom's stress levels went down after a couple of nights, understandable. But the babies stayed high. And so people are very concerned that then the mom and baby are no longer in sync, and the mom is no longer attuned to the baby's needs. That is, I think, a very understandable concern. But what this study did not do is, one, it did not have a control condition, right? So we don't know what happened without cry it out, with other methods. There's no comparison. Two, the study only ran for 3 nights. We don't know what happened after the third night. And it just so happens that in my clinical experience and based on other pediatric sleep experts, what they say, 3 nights is kind of the average for how long it takes for cry it out to work. So we don't know what happened afterwards. And also, let me just mention that the moms and other parents' stress levels and their mental health is so important to the baby's emotional health and their and the bonding between parent and baby, that we have to sort of weigh the pros, the costs and benefits, right? Yes, you can avoid cry it out because you don't want to harm the bonding between the baby. But if you are so stressed out and so sleep deprived, and your mental health and your depression, your mood is being affected, that's also detrimental to your baby's well-being and the bonding you have with your baby. So, when sometimes I kind of break the hard news to people that there's really no such thing as no cry sleep training. I mean, there's the 1 in a million baby that just naturally sleeps through the night with no training. I don't know how that happens. It's very rare. There's no such thing as no cry sleep training. It's just whether you want to do a little bit of crying for a very long period of the baby's life and your life, or you want to do a lot of crying all at once for a short period of a few days at a time. Um, and there's pros and cons to each. But if you, as the parent, you are struggling a lot with your mental health and stress levels because you're not getting enough sleep or because your baby is crying a lot and not able to sleep well, I mean, it might actually be better for the baby in the long run and even the short run to do what you need to do to help the baby sleep so that you can both sleep well and be in a better state to bond.
Right. Wow. Yeah, I think hopefully this all this analysis of the research and your own personal experience along with your clinical experience can bring a lot of clarity to the parents.
Mhm.
So I
Yes.
think it's really, as adults, we can make a choice, but each choice is going to lead to a consequence.
Yes, yes. And I want to just acknowledge here that it is so, so tough to make the decision to do cry it out or some variation thereof. It broke my heart. Oh my gosh, it's like the hardest thing to do. And a lot of the argument against cry it out is just if it feels that bad, it must be bad. And I can so, so relate to that intuition. I think there's actually, a lot of truth to that. Um, and in our modern society where parents have to work and, you know, there are demands on your time and you can't nap like multiple times through the day. Like things are just different now in our modern society that has, you know, such that our biology maybe has not caught up to that yet. So there are the realities of our world, and there are the realities of biology, and sometimes it kind of the two go against each other. So I want to acknowledge that our instincts are telling us very much that we should not do cry it out, and cry it out still may be the very best thing you can do for your sleep and your baby's sleep and for everybody's mental health. So it's not easy. It's not easy. I had to literally leave the house and just go driving around for like multiple hours while my husband held down the fort at home because I could not stand to be home and listen to my baby cry. It's so hard. And after we did it, it helped everybody. It really made a huge difference in everybody's health.
Yeah, yeah. One of my colleagues told me she's not a sleep psychologist, she's just a regular psychologist,
Hmm.
but she did the sleep training.
Hmm.
And even though exactly the process was so heartbroken, but the result is so good, especially for the baby. She
Hmm.
said when she entered the child's room in the morning, the child already wake up, but he was able to play on bed by himself, seems like very happy on his own.
Yes.
So sounds like he was able to learn self-soothing skills,
Yes.
right? Not
Yes.
only soothe himself to sleep, but also entertain himself when he wakes up.
Yes. And self-soothing is actually a very important skill for a baby to learn. We talk about our instinct of not wanting to leave the baby alone, very understandable. But traditionally too, we also parented in a much less intensive way. Nowadays, it feels like there, oh my gosh, I could go on about this, but it seems like parenting has to be very intensive. Like we're always like watching the baby, doing something stimulating with the baby, we're educating the baby, we're doing Montessori, we're doing gentle parenting, we're doing this and that. We're always like doing something with the baby. Whereas traditionally, women had to, go tend the vegetable garden and go take care of other babies and go milk the cow and like all sorts of things. A lot of babies spent a lot of time not being entertained by their parents. They were looked after, they were given their, taken care of, but they spent a lot of time self-entertaining too, babies and young kids. So, in a way, we are doing more intensive parenting than we used to. And um, teaching the baby to self-soothe is in a way getting back to maybe in some ways a more natural pattern of things.
Right. I think my opinion on the second question I asked you, along with the self-soothing component, actually, because
Mhm,
my concern is if parents always try to go to bed with their children together,
mhm,
right? That possibly going to get in the way of the children to learn how to self-soothe themselves before bedtime. So
mhm,
basically the children's bedtime wind down routine is relying on the parents doing something
mhm.
and relying on the parents to be there.
Yeah. So this is the trickier thing to answer because there is such a cultural component to it. Historically, a lot of people co-slept. And even today, a lot of cultures still co-sleep. And it seems like unfathomable for a baby or a young child to sleep on their own. So I want to very much respect that. I think there are situations in which co-sleeping is perfectly fine if it's not disrupting overall everybody's health and mental health and ability to sleep well, and especially if the mom or the parents are able to live a lifestyle where co-sleeping is okay for everybody, then by all means, not in the first 3-ish months, because when the baby is a newborn, co-sleeping is too risky. The stakes are too high. I mean, there are just heartbreaking stories of accidentally, smothering the baby, and we definitely don't want to risk that. So before the baby is able to roll on their own and hold up their own head and be able to sort of protect themselves, in the very young months we do not want to co-sleep for safety reasons. After that, there are lots of people who co-sleep, and it's fine. But you're right, co-sleeping ends up making associations that the baby needs in order to fall asleep, and that's where we get into childhood insomnia, of sleep onset association insomnia. um, and that is tricky because that can really get in the way of the parents' ability to have intimate time with their partner, just any sort of wind down time for themselves, and their own sleep quality too. Research does show that when you co-sleep, the child's sleep is the same quality is the same quality as if they sleep on their own, but the parent's sleep is significantly disrupted. That makes sense because babies are very noisy and very um, active when they sleep. Lots of parents are talking about their babies making wild shrieks and snorts and slapping them in the face and rolling onto their head. And it's pretty hard to sleep well when your baby's in bed with you, or sometimes even in the same room with you. Um, so then we get into a case of weighing the pros and cons. And it can be a hard habit to break. Once you start co-sleeping, it's very hard to stop co-sleeping. But there are ways to help your baby to unlearn that habit and to learn more independent sleep. So I don't know if that's a very satisfying answer, but it's a tricky one because I mean there are also degrees of co-sleeping. There you can have baby in your bed, or in their bassinet beside your bed, or in a crib across the room, in a different room with the doors open, in a totally different floor of the house with the doors closed. There are degrees of how close you are when you're sleeping with your baby. And for some people, they just literally cannot sleep with their babies on the same floor with them, and that's me. Like my baby has been in her own crib since like the second week, but some people are able to co-sleep into the toddler years and be fine. So this is more of a personal choice.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like there's a lot of topics in sleep field, right? There's no certain answer.
Hmm.
There are cultural differences, there are individual differences, and there are individual preference. Um, but I think it's great discussions to see different point of view and different concerns. I do respect a lot of parents' choice. But
Mhm.
sometimes if I notice the problem, since they already come to see me, when they see me, that means either they have some mental issues or they have some sleep problems, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Then I often raise my concerns and try to brainstorm with them. Because
Yeah.
when I treat insomnia patients, I have patients who for CBTI, sometimes we will do sleep restriction. We're going to suggest them to go to bed at a certain time. But
Mhm.
the problem is they're going to have to accompany the baby, not the baby anymore, the child, actually young child, to sleep. So they end up nap
Oh,
in the
yeah.
late night with the
Oh,
child
yes.
for 2 hours and then wake up, do their own thing, and try to go to bed around the time I gave them. That
Yeah.
does not work.
No, that's really, really tough. Yeah, I see that pattern too, especially when you have a younger baby who's still breastfeeding, if the parent is breastfeeding, um, they'll do like a last breastfeeding session of the evening. And while they're doing that, they're on the bed and both the child and the mom fall asleep at the same time on the breast, and the baby is basically unable to go to sleep without nursing on the breast, which is very work intensive for the mom, right? Especially if you're breastfeeding into like toddler years. And then the mom catches a long nap at like 8 p.m. And then by the time it's their prescribed bedtime from Dr. Xu, it's like they're definitely not going to sleep. So that's really, really tough. And that's a habit that I would definitely want to help them to move away from. Even if they accompany their child to bed in the beginning, there are ways to do it that make it a little bit less tightly associated. For example, nursing, breastfeeding outside of the bed and then going to bed together. And once that's okay, nursing and then doing a bedtime routine in between nursing and going to bed, introducing more and more activities in between nursing and sleeping in bed to break that association. Or once you get to that point, you can lie down for a shorter and shorter amount of time with your child before they fall asleep on their own. And one trick that I absolutely love is the good night light. So this is a light that you program to turn off after a certain amount of time or at a certain hour.
Oh.
And with an old enough child, with a toddler or, child, you can teach them, okay, we're going to lie together and cuddle and sing songs and reflect on our day while the light is on. But once the goodnight light turns off, then mama has to leave or daddy has to leave. And then you'll sleep on your own. And that works like a charm because you're not the one telling them, I have to leave now. And then it gets into a power struggle and there's crying and you feel guilty and all of that. It's an external thing that tells you that tells everybody that mama has to leave now. Sorry, mama has no choice. The light has said that the mama has to leave, so mama is going to leave. And when you do this consistently, the child learns the pattern. And children actually love patterns. They love knowing what to expect, especially toddlers. So once you do this consistently enough, they stop being upset about it. They learn to self-soothe. They learn to expect to fall asleep on their own. And after a while, you're able to do the goodnight light without you getting into the bed with them.
Love that. But overall, I think you mentioned a very important point is no matter we are children or we are adults, the bed sleep association,
Yes.
right? Or the wind down routine and sleep association are so strong, so important.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, sleep is something we do every day. And if you teach your brain to associate the bed with sleep every day, then you're going to get sleepy when you get into bed. But anything else can also be associated with being asleep or being awake. Your favorite teddy bear can be associated with sleep, or this particular song can be associated with falling asleep. And that's good news because you can help your child to build up a bedtime routine that introduces a couple of very consistent, very predictable sleep cues, so that by the time you reach the end of that 10-minute, 20-minute bedtime routine, their brain fully knows that it's time to sleep. It's had time to wind down and get sleepy. and there are no surprises at this point. It is bedtime. So really one of the best interventions for pediatric sleep, for children's sleep at any age, is to have a consistent bedtime routine.
Mm,
I started doing that with my baby at 2 weeks old.
mm,
She doesn't understand what reading a book means, and she doesn't understand like a good night light or whatever. She's not old enough to really like get it yet. And still I have a very specific and like almost like a military precision bedtime routine that I do with her every single night, no matter what happens. And that is going to be one of the most important things for helping her to learn to wind down and self-soothe independently.
wow, you start that early,
Yeah,
even before she
because
understands it.
oh
Wow.
yeah, the earlier you start it and the more consistent you do it, the less cry it out you're gonna have to do later.
Oh.
Yeah.
A lot of wonderful tips for for our audience.
Yes, I'm so passionate about this, as you can tell, because I just think, society kind of tells mothers, especially, but all parents, that you just have to suck it up. Once you have a baby, you're never going to sleep again. Sleep, oh, forget it. And it's built so much into our culture that I think a lot of parents don't actually think there's anything they can do to help themselves or help their baby sleep better. But actually, there is a lot that we can do. And a lot of it is not necessarily immediately intuitive, because we often think there are tips and tricks that we can do at night to summon sleep. But as a sleep psychologist, sometimes the harder you work, the less it happens, right? But what we don't talk about, especially with new parents, is a lot of what they do during the day, like the light exposure that we talked about. So important. The timing and the pattern of napping, so important. The way that you give yourself forgiveness and flexibility and grace, but also give yourself and your baby some helpful bumpers, also very important. So I know we don't have time to talk about all the tips today, but I just want to give people the message that there is actually hope. There's a lot that you can do. It's not completely out of your control.
Yeah. And there are a lot of sleep specialists all over the place, right?
Mhm.
So if you really, you tried all this and you still struggle, you don't know how to tailor a treatment plan for your own life to fit your schedule, your baby's schedules, and find a sleep specialist locally. And they
Mhm.
possibly can guide you through this.
Yes, it's so helpful to have a guiding person. Even sometimes, even though you know rationally what you should do, having someone help you to problem solve the barriers and to be your cheerleader can go a long way as well. And you might get a tip that you never thought of from a specialist too. So
Yeah.
absolutely agree. Hmm.
Yeah, and I remember a lot of time my patients, not only for sleep problem, for other things, they don't do any practice until the day before, the several days before they're gonna see me, right? Because it's pressure. Okay, I have to report something. I have to
Yeah,
face my
sometimes
provider.
having that accountability is all it takes. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, wow. So I know your journey is still ongoing. I look forward to hear if there's anything new, any more inspiration comes up in the future. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Nicole.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun. And if you ever want to do a follow-up with like a parent of an older child, like a toddler or preschooler, we can do that too. We'll just follow my life journey along the way, right?
Exactly. I gonna possibly start messaging you every several
Oh,
years.
yes, absolutely. Happy to talk through that anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I think this is wonderful. Just by talking to you, even though I don't have a child, I feel like I'm more ready.
Yes. Yes, being prepared is half the battle. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.